All right, welcome back to the channel. So, wow, this is a doozy. A little bit in the rumor, but it's a rumor that I hear, and and I think it may be some truth to this. The real reason that Terence Crawford is ducking Errol Spence Jr. is that Bud already knows the outcome of that fight. So let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we are going to talk about the welterweight division, and specifically, we're going to talk about the two top fighters in the welterweight division, who are Errol Spence Jr., who is the WBC champion and the IBF champion, and Terence Crawford, who is the WBO welterweight champion. Now, as you know, there has been a lot of conversation over the last 2-3 years about Errol Spence Jr. fighting Terence Crawford. It is, and I think it is safe to say, one of the biggest fights in boxing. It is definitely the biggest fight in the welterweight division. There may be some fights with Canelo Alvarez that are bigger, maybe. But I'm telling you, if it's bigger, it's because it's with Errol Spence Jr. Terence Crawford does not have Canelo Alvarez does not have a fight available to him other than Errol Spence Jr., which is as big as Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. So obviously people have been talking about this and wanting to fight, but for some reason, the fight's not getting made. And people are saying, hey, this is, is it Terrence's fault? Is it Errol's fault and all that? Now, I've been paying very close attention, and I can tell you for certain that it's not Errol Spence Jr. I have been waffling on why exactly it is Terence Crawford. And I switch a lot of times between it's Bob Arum and it's Terence Crawford. So, like I said, I'm doing less live streams. I'm spending more time doing research, asking questions, seeking out answers to try to explain things that otherwise would not make sense. So that's what I did. And this is what I have come to understand. Now, these are new conversations that I've had with people, and also an older conversation that I had and I've had with Errol Spence Sr., the father of Errol Spence Jr. And the conversation that I had with Errol Spence Sr. several years ago jives 100% with what I was told about the relationship between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence. And this is what it is. Errol Spence Jr. became famous for beating up Floyd Mayweather Jr. He went into a sparring match where he was brought to that sparring match with Kenny Porter, and he set up, Kenny Porter said this, pretty much set up a ringer on Floyd Mayweather Jr. and said, hey, yeah, we got a guy that you can fight Errol Spence. So Errol goes in there and fights Floyd. Floyd is not quite sure, right? My understanding is he knew who he was, but he had not seen enough of him to know really how good he was. So he took the sparring match, and Floyd Mayweather Jr. got beat up. My understanding is it was the fight for Manny Pacquiao, that they were sparring, or it was either Manny Pacquiao that they were fighting for, or it was Andre Berto. Whichever the fight was that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was preparing for, they brought Errol Spence Jr. into camp to help him prepare. That was what it was, to prepare him to fight a southpaw. So Floyd Mayweather Jr. is fighting Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao's a southpaw. Errol is a southpaw. So we said we have a good active southpaw for you to fight. But my understanding is that they bet money, and they're like, yeah, but you're not going to be able to beat this southpaw. So Floyd took the bet. They had the fight, and Errol Spence Jr. mopped him. Right? And I don't know if there was a second fight or if he came back out and they fought again and they had a better match. I've heard different variations of that. But for certain, what I've known, and every party that I have engaged with says, no, Errol got the best of Floyd Mayweather Jr., gave him a black eye, and really, he was mad because he was not ready for that level of competition at that time. He just wasn't there in his mind. He got in there to have a fight, against a young, experienced guy, and he got in there against a monster, right? So anyway, Floyd fights him. It's a wreck, right? He becomes famous and all that. Now, what my understanding is the reason that that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was set up by that Floyd Mayweather Jr. they knew that this kid, Errol Spence Jr., was ready for Floyd Mayweather Jr. And the reason, my understanding is that they knew it because Errol Spence Jr. had already fought Terence Crawford and sparred him. And when Errol Spence Jr. fought Terence Crawford, this is the rumor that I have, Errol Spence Jr. knocked out Terence Crawford. Stopped him. His excuse, according to the people that I'm talking about, Terence Crawford, was that he wasn't ready. He was in training camp and all of this stuff, right? But the fact remains that Errol Spence Jr. wore him out in a sparring session. And that Errol Spence Jr. remembers it. Terence Crawford remembers it. But Terence Crawford, chalked it up to, he was just off that day or he wasn't prepared or whatever it was. But after Errol did that and he did it to Floyd and then he started going up through the rankings in 147, Terence Crawford's not interested in fighting him because he does not believe that he can beat Errol Spence Jr. Because originally what he thought, and this is what I'm being told, he was talking shit like, yeah, he might have got one off on me or whatever, right? But nah, if I ever really get to him, it's going to be a different thing under those big lights. And Errol Spence has proven that there's nothing different amongst those big lights. And so Terence Crawford just doesn't want to fight him. Now, that is what I was told. Now, I've been told, and I have conversations with people, and people tell me stuff all the time. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. So I would say, okay, my initial reaction was like, okay, maybe that's right? It seems like that would be the case. It makes sense because these guys all fight each other. Yeah, I know they're sparring matches, and when you're coming up, right, these young fighters who are future champions get in the ring with the established champions, and they are the sparring partners for them because they're good enough to have a good fight, right? But they're inexperienced and they're not at the point to actually do that fight under the lights in a championship circumstance. Certain people are very well known for being sparring partners for other people, right? One of the, like Larry Holmes is an established sparring partner for Ali. Ali my understanding, was a sparring partner for Sonny Liston. So when Ali is talking about Sonny Liston and saying, I'm going to beat you, you're a big bad bear and all that, that's because Muhammad Ali already knew he could beat Sonny Liston because Sonny Liston and Ali sparred. So he knew what he would be when he got bigger. And so did Sonny Liston. So Sonny Liston really didn't want to fight him. And Ali had to chase him around all over the place to get the fight. And Ali wanted that fight. My understanding is he wanted the Sonny Liston fight to get to Floyd Patterson. Right? So they knew what Ali was when Ali was 17, 18 years old because he's fighting in the National Golden Gloves and he's going around sparring people. So a lot of times these guys, they know how good they are because they've sparred them, and that's why they don't get the fights. Some of these guys actually have to act like they're going to lose in sparring to get fights because they have all the matchmakers there watching them, right? So anyway, that's my understanding of why it is, the root of it. Right now, the reason I'm saying, yeah, well, this makes more sense to me is because of something that when I spoke with Errol Spence Jr. several years ago, that he said in passing, right, about Terence. Because I asked him, right, I said, what happened in the Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight? And the sparring match. And Mr. Spence, I'm telling you, is very, very indirect. He's not the type of person that is going to share information with you that he doesn't want to share. But he gave me enough information to say, yeah, that most of the rumors that you hear are true. That's all he said. Most of the rumors you hear about that is true. And yes, Errol went into that sparring match, and we always say, bro, when we spar, we are going for it because we know what's going on in there. If we're gonna spar you, you're gonna have a real fight on your hands with Errol Spence. He's not going in there to be your sparring partner and have you beat up on him. No, he's going in there to prove he's better than you, right? So I asked him about Terence Crawford, and he said this to me. He said, Martin, because my name is Martin. He's like, Martin, you're gonna be very surprised at how easy that fight is. That's what he said. You say you're gonna be surprised how easy that fight is. I'm going to tell you right now, Errol is too big, he's too strong, and he's way too fast for Terence. He's going to beat Terence Crawford, and he's going to knock Terence Crawford out. That's what Errol Spence Jr. Sr. told me 3 years ago. And we talked about it right when we were talking about Errol Spence Jr. sparring with Floyd Mayweather. So when I hear this from one party, after I already know that Errol Spence Jr.'s camp has absolutely no doubt in their mind that they will knock out Terence Crawford, I conclude that it's very reasonable that the reason that they would believe that is they've already fought him, and they already know that's easy money. I wouldn't be surprised if Jaron Ennis has not already sparred to Errol Spence, right? Or other people brought Jaron Ennis into camp, and they're like, no way am I fighting this guy in a ring, because they'll use that as a way to test out the young fighter. Oh, let me see what this young fighter got. And if that young fighter's got too much, that fighter's not going to fight him. And that's what Sean Porter said. He said, man, I'm going to leave Jaron Ennis to those young animals. So I'm telling you, man, it's really interesting stuff about Terence Crawford, man, and Bob Arum. And I just don't believe, man. I think Terence Crawford, I tend to believe the rumor that Terence Crawford just absolutely positively knows he's going to get knocked out. Right now, I've heard other things about why Errol Spence Jr.'s knockout streak has slowed down, and not all of it is related to his diet. Some of them are related to his gloves and the negotiations taking place between people that are saying that specify his gloves, right? Where you have him hitting somebody like Mikey Garcia in big pads, and Mikey Garcia is wearing Reyes or something like that, which barely cover his knuckles. And those are things that get negotiated in contracts, right? So just as we go through this boxing conversation and stuff, sometimes things are obvious, and other things that are the obviousness of things are not obvious to a lot of people. But at the end of the day, man, Terence Crawford, I am fully above board that Terence Crawford already knows the outcome of that fight. And Terence Crawford does not want to get embarrassed by getting beat up and knocked out by Errol Spence Jr., because Terence Crawford is a very, very good athlete, but he's just not as good a fighter as Errol Spence. And that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.